All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland, the best in paranormal talk radio. I'm your host, Chauncey Hallworth. This is my co-host, Kara Kittrick.
Hello.
Kara, do you have any news for us today?
Yes, I do. I've got a lot of real deal type news this week, less in the way of Bigfoot sightings and hauntings and more in the way of conspiracy realness. So let's dive in. The Guardian recently released a piece on the many challenges of being a black Dominican in a field that is dominated by white people, ufology. The piece went into the 2018 controversy over a top MUFON official who was disavowed by many of his peers after expressing racist far-right views on social media. Is everyone truly welcome in the UFO community? Sort of, the piece concludes. It just depends on who you talk to. A recent poll reveals that perceptions of coronavirus as dangerous or not is strongly correlated to political affiliations. About 4 in 10 Democrats say coronavirus is an imminent threat compared to 2 in 10 Republicans. Approximately 40% of Democrats say they haven't changed their routines as a result of coronavirus, compared to 54% of Republicans. In the poll, almost everyone surveyed said their opinion on the matter was not affected by their politics. Clearly. Along the same lines, the leader of the Italian Democratic Party now says that he has coronavirus. The Democratic Party is currently in power in the Italian government. And in Maryland, news came out recently that a man now confirmed to have coronavirus attended the Conservative Political Action Conference while he was ill. This conference is attended by basically everyone of any significance on the right, including the president and vice president, although there is no evidence that our leaders were actually exposed. And finally, oil prices have collapsed by the largest amount since 1991 as Saudi Arabia plans to flood the market with cheap oil after the failure of an agreement with Russia. This has predictably caused financial chaos in the stock market, but is maybe not particularly bad news for anyone who, like most Americans, owns a car but doesn't own any stocks. Back to you, Chauncey.
I'm a little surprised, I guess. I never really thought about racism in the UFO community.
Yeah, well, so it was interesting. I was looking up UFOs, and there weren't really any new sightings last week, but it was, because the Guardian's a real newspaper, so it was interesting to me to see, an expose on this topic that I had never thought about, but hey, I'm white. Of course I've never thought about it, right?
Well, I like how these newspapers don't, credibly cover ufology unless, there's some sort of...
Right, no, yeah.
Which, makes sense to me. Don't get me wrong.
Although
totally
they kind of have been covered, in the last few years, that's kind of changed.
Yeah,
with
a little bit.
UFO coverage in, the New York Times and the Washington Post and stuff.
Well, traditionally...
but traditionally, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
UFO articles in mainstream media have a couple of snarky lines. I'm guessing this one had no snark.
No, it really didn't. It was basically just hey, here's, it was more of a personal essay, really. Here's the experience my dad had in the UFO community.
Right.
So.
Huh. That's wild. I wonder if that has to do with any of the political associations that conspiracy theories tend to have,
Right.
Personally, I find it, a little difficult being a liberally minded guy in the UFO community. There seems to be a lot that aren't, but we've made a lot of connections that are, of course.
Right, yeah. And there's definitely cliques, right?
Right, yeah.
Kind of William Pullen was talking about that a little, and everything he's told us about the UFO community, it makes it sound like, yeah, the UFO community is really hard for anyone who has slightly different views on what the UFO community is. So if you have a different background or a different race, I can imagine that would be hard.
And he's also pointed out to us that the polarization of politics has made its way into the UFO community.
Absolutely.
And that practically every UFO conversation tends to get shut down because politics gets brought up.
It devolves into that. Because
right,
as we all know, all the aliens are centrists or whatever. Or, they're progressives from Mars. What do they care about our political stuff? But, it's... I don't care what the political view of my hamburger is.
And they probably don't care about us either. They're just here to
I
eat
get
us.
it. I was like, are you eating the aliens?
No, they're
eating us. How to serve man and all that. I get it.
I find it hard to believe that the praying mantis one is a vegetarian.
True. I mean, I agree.
And then coronavirus, there's no getting away from coronavirus.
Yeah,
okay,
everyone else is covering this too, but
right. So
it's a pandemic. We got
the percentages that you just gave me. I'm going to ask you to give me those again.
Yeah.
What was it?
So 4 in 10 Democrats say coronavirus is an imminent threat compared to 2 in 10 Republicans. So twice as many. And interestingly, those numbers are still both much lower than I thought.
Right.
It's still less than a majority in both parties.
Right, but I feel like the follow-up statistic was contradictory to that.
It kind of was. And, that's always a thing with polling. It depends on how you ask the question.
Well, it seems like 4 in 10 Democrats think it's an issue, while 2 in 10 Republicans think it's an issue, but less Democrats are changing their life about it, and more Republicans are?
Oh, so the follow-up statistic was 40% haven't changed their routines. Of Democrats, but 54% say they haven't changed their routines. It was worded kind of weirdly.
I see.
Worded kind of weirdly.
Yeah.
But so basically, more than half of Republicans haven't changed their routines, and a little less than half of Democrats haven't changed their routines.
It makes you wonder if, because the automatic response to this is that, it's the president's fault or it's the government's fault.
Sure.
It's the information coming from the White House. And, that was the automatic thing that I jumped to as well.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I think about it, it also might have to do with...
What?
You done looking at yourself?
No.
All right.
I will never be done mucking for the camera.
It also might have to do with the location of these people.
Yeah, and that's possible.
Because I live in a pretty rural area, and I do feel a little less threatened. I think if I were to live in New York City or live in a big city, I think I would be chronically more apt to be terrified.
Yeah, you'd be more worried. And more to the point, the West Coast has been hit very hard.
Right.
The East Coast is just starting to get it. Florida's just starting to get it. It's hardly in the South. It's hardly in, the Southwest. Mm. So I imagine that affects it too. But also, just when you look at media, right-wing media has tended to downplay the significance of the virus.
Right.
And I would say, not left-wing, but more mainstream media, I think has tended to be a little more hysterical about it. I think, just watching the evening news, it's like,
yeah, okay. I agree.
that's all they're talking about.
Well, you've been staying with us for the past couple of weeks, and every night we watch the news, and the first thing that comes up is the death toll.
Yeah,
it's always all about the death toll.
The same stock footage of the cruise.
Right.
And then the same stock footage of, President
of the
Trump
nurses carrying the sheets as they're pushing people out and
exactly.
Crazy.
So, I think it also really depends on where you get your news source. But compare that way on the other side, Rush Limbaugh said the coronavirus is just the common cold. And it's, a conspiracy.
And Trump told people to go to work.
The president. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
which is, that's, I would argue, more wrong probably than being hyperbolic about.
So I'm going to put this out there to the audience out there. Regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, your side is not doing a very good job.
Yes.
Of relaying smart information. I saw what's his name? Neil deGrasse Tyson. I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson on Stephen Colbert, and he was asked, what his take on the coronavirus was. And he
because
basically
he has any training in medicine or anything related.
He, of course, put that out there. He said, I'm a well-read scientist, but of course I'm an astrophysicist, and this is not my field of expertise. But he said his view was of the coronavirus that we are going through a very large experiment right now. And the experiment is when life and death is on the line, will people listen to scientists?
Which, of course, obviously, no.
Well, some of them might. Do you?
I mean,
As much as you can.
Yeah,
what one person can do, another can do. They might. Fear is a great motivator.
I don't know of any specific advice from scientists on this topic.
Wash your damn hands.
Yeah, I mean, I've been washing... I washed my hands before it was cool.
Yeah.
I washed my hands before there was coronavirus.
Totally. I was a shut-in before it was cool, so...
Yeah. I see on the news, it's like, oh my God, they want us to wash our hands?
Right.
Look down at my hands and they're like covered in ants and stuff.
Right.
Totally.
But I've been saving that.
Yeah, exactly.
That was the one time that I shook hands with that one person I cared about. And then the Italian leader getting coronavirus, that's pretty intense.
It's a big deal, and it's hitting Italy really hard.
And as much as this pains me, I think we got to throw a bone to Ted Cruz, because Ted Cruz was at that same CPAC thing that the president and vice
everyone
president
was
were
at it. I mean,
but Ted Cruz is self-quarantining.
Really?
Yeah.
So, yeah. There's a pun floating out there somewhere about Ted Cruz and also people on cruises.
Oh yeah.
And
totally.
I don't want to bother trying to formulate it.
Right.
But just come up with your own pun, listeners. It'll be good, I promise.
Right. And you can throw in a little something about hiding out until he's finally able to grow in a mustache if you want. He's got a beard with no mustache.
Really?
Because he can't do it. Yeah, his mustache is...
So he's rocking like the sort of prospector or like mountain man kind of vibe.
Totally.
The Jebediah.
Right. Yeah, totally.
I don't know what that's called. I just call it the Jebediah.
Yeah. I assume there's not a lot of Mennonite listeners, so I guess we can mock that all we want. Do Mennonites listen to the radio? One of them listens to the radio.
It's a silly look. That's
Do you
what
think
I'm
Mennonites
saying.
believe in Nibiru?
I feel like they would if they had heard about it.
Right.
I feel like they're a ripe audience for Nibiru that ought to be exploited, probably. You just need to make like pamphlets.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah. All right. And then finally, oil prices going down. It's hard not to think that these oil prices are also connected to coronavirus.
They are a little
bit.
But
that they're also, because of course people aren't traveling. Mm-hmm. Therefore oil's getting spent less. But at the same time, people are more apt to have stuff delivered.
Yeah.
So maybe that'll bring it back up. But
this is also something that's been in the works, though. There's been talks between Russia and OPEC for a while, and basically these talks just collapsed. And so now Saudi Arabia saying, well, screw you, we're just going to sell our oil for as cheap as we can.
Right.
Because we don't have an agreement anymore, and that's what's happening.
I can't help but to think that there is some sort of lowering of the price in order to slow the progression of more eco-friendly energy.
It's possible.
But I often think about
it's bad for oil producing companies or countries though when the price is lowered. I mean,
yeah, but it's also
Venezuela,
bad if it goes away and is low forever.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, Venezuela is not doing good.
It is not, but it was doing pretty well until oil prices crashed.
It was doing well until they elected Bernie Sanders, is what it was.
Yeah, it's just Bernie Sanders wearing a Maduro mask.
Right.
We all know this.
Yeah. One of those comedy shows was saying that Bernie Sanders' running mate was going to be the ghost of Fidel Castro. Which
I'd vote for him.
Which I thought was pretty dang funny,
Well, he said he wouldn't have a running mate who didn't agree with him on Medicare for all.
Right.
So I think that kind of leaves
Warren?
Maybe Warren, yeah.
Yeah.
Or the ghost of Fidel Castro.
The ghost of Fidel Castro. Yeah.
All right. I imagine is all in for Medicare for all.
We'll see if these prices lower, because now when I live, if I want to do a drive-through fast food place, I got to drive to like Medford. There's Taco Bell here in Ashland. There's nothing else.
There's Wendy's.
It's not, I don't think it's drive-through.
Maybe not.
Who makes a Wendy's that's not drive-through?
Yeah, it's got to be drive-through.
I don't know. All right.
Chime in, listeners. Is Wendy's a drive-through? We want to hear from you.
This is what gas makes me think of. Strife in the Middle East makes me think of my drive-through eating situation. All right. You're listening to Radio Wasteland. When we come back, we will be talking about black-eyed children. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. Here this evening, Kara and I will be talking about black-eyed children. Kara's done a little research, and she's going to answer some of my pressing questions to the best of her ability.
Yeah, just urban legend monsters in general. But
that's true. We're going to cover Skinwalkers later, too.
Yeah, exactly.
So, black-eyed children didn't really come to me. I guess that sounds crazy. They started coming to me when I,
that is what black-eyed children do.
When I had that aneurysm.
So,
no, I saw it in movies first. Being a horror movie fan, I saw a couple of movies with black-eyed children in it. Maybe not specifically black-eyed children, but the concept of the hooded kid in a hoodie coming to the door, knocking, disappearing.
Well, there was a 2012 movie called The Black-Eyed Kids.
Yeah, this was not called that, though. Okay. This was Shut the Door or something ridiculous.
Interesting. I wasn't aware that there were actually a lot of other movies that kind of covered the concept. But
yeah. Well, I don't know if a lot, but a few.
Yeah, well, that's more than I thought.
And, I thought it was really cool and really interesting, but I had the same concern while watching it that I have in real life, and that is, what the hell would these things even be? Sure. It seems like a pretty far-fetched, weird concept. It's like The Ring, a haunted videotape. I mean, sure, when you're wrapped up in the suspension of disbelief of watching the film, you can get in there. But, if you take a step back, you're all like, what do ghosts know about videotapes?
Sure.
And why does it have to work in the VCR? I mean, if it just haunted the thing, couldn't it?
Well, I think there are some differences there, because I don't know that there's anything about modern black-eyed children that's culturally specific to modern times.
I think it's like kids on their own outside in hoodies. I don't know. I find it weird. So what do we think that these things might be?
So there's a lot of different theories. It ranges from, aliens to vampires to ghosts to demons, etc. It kind of depends on what your worldview is, frankly, when you're looking at how you're coming to the story. But I think a lot of the explanations are generally spiritual in nature,
right?
Because one of the hallmarks of the black-eyed children is that they require some form of invitation or something like that.
To come in or to start knocking at your door?
To come in.
I see.
And that seems to be generally what they're after, and they get very upset when they're denied it. So, and that's the hallmark of basically every black-eyed children story. Can I just walk you through?
Yeah.
So here's the first ever black-eyed children story, basically. It comes from 1996, a Texas journalist called Brian Bethel. So he's sitting in a theater parking lot in his car. He's using the light of the theater marquee to write a check. I cracked the window a bit, he says, anticipating a spiel for money. These two children have just approached him. But I was immediately gripped by an incomprehensible, soul-racking fear. I had no idea why. A conversation ensued between one boy, a somewhat suave, olive-skinned, curly-headed young man, and myself. The other, a red-headed, pale-skinned, freckled young man, stayed in the background. The spokesman, as I've come to think of him, told me that he and his companion needed a ride. They wanted to see a movie, Mortal Kombat, but they had left their money at their mother's house. Could I give them a ride? Plausible enough. But all throughout this exchange, the irrational fear continued and grew. I had no reason to be frightened of these two boys, but I was, terribly. After a bit more conversation, I looked up at the theater marquee and down at the digital clock display in my car. Mortal Kombat's last show of the night had already started. By the time I could have driven the boys anywhere and back, it would have practically been over. All the while, the spokesman uttered assurances. It wouldn't take long. They were just 2 little kids. They didn't have a gun or anything. That last part was a little unnerving. I noticed that...
The kids said this?
The kids, yes, the kids were explaining to him, what are you afraid of? We don't have a gun. We're just 2 little kids.
Okay, continue.
Which is not how I usually go about reassuring people, but different strokes, I guess. I noticed that my hand had strayed toward the lock on the door. I pulled it away, perhaps a little too violently. In the short time I had broken the gaze of the spokesman, something had changed, and my mind exploded in a vortex of all-consuming terror. Both boys stared at me with coal-black eyes, the sort of eyes one sees these days on aliens or bargain basement vampires on late-night television, soulless orbs like 2 great swaths of starless night. I did what I feel any rational person would do. I full-on freaked out inside while trying to appear completely sane and calm. I apologized to the kids. I made whatever excuse came to mind, all of them designed to get me out of there fast. I wrapped my hand around the gear shift, threw the car into reverse, and began to roll up the window, apologizing all the while. The spokesman banged sharply on the window as I rolled it up. His words, full of anger, echo in my mind even today. We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in. And, yeah, so he drives away. The encounter ends. He doesn't see them again.
How young are we talking, or do we know?
He doesn't say in this particular encounter, but generally we're talking 10, 12.
Teenager.
Yeah, exactly. Teenager. Yeah. A little younger sometimes, a little older sometimes. Usually there's like varying ages in a group.
Right.
Usually usually there's one who talks and the others don't. That's a big thing. And usually that one's a little older. So there are thousands of these stories online, and they all follow generally the same pattern. They're just doing something innocuous. They're approached by usually multiple black-eyed children, sometimes just one. They have some, minor request, but but the person feels really uneasy about granting it, and they don't know why. And then they see that, these kids have these black eyes, and they freak out.
Yeah, well, I feel...
That's how these stories go.
Yeah, I feel that, when you listen to these things, you try to take apart what they're saying. And
sure.
And the only thing that was throwing me off there, okay, so he said one thing that threw me off and one thing that made sense. One thing that threw me off was he got a little poetic about how black their eyes were.
Well, so this was written in a newspaper. This wasn't public. This guy originally published this account in the first mention of it was in 1997 on a message board, and it was not poetic there. This was published in 2013, him reiterating the encounter and going through it in more detail.
So he had some time to hit a thesaurus.
He had, and this guy is a reporter.
Who this happened to?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So... And this, for me, is one of the big
That explains the eloquence, I guess.
Yeah. Well, this is, for me, one thing that makes me skeptical of this entire phenomenon, is there are very few reports of this before 1996, none of which, as far as I can tell, were reported on prior to that time. There's people now saying, hey, this happened to me in the 80s, but they didn't say anything at the time. And this guy is a reporter, and he is specifically like a spirituality reporter, writer person.
Right.
So the fact that these sightings appeared all of a sudden in 1996, and now there's thousands and thousands of sightings. It's a big deal. You can go on the internet and you can find tons of these sightings, but they're pretty much all anonymous.
Right. I hadn't really. The one thing that he said, I guess I should finish what I was saying, that I identified with is when he said he did what any rational person would do. I was sitting there thinking, oh yeah, what's that? And he's all got absolutely terrified and got out of there. I'm all, okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's reasonable.
That's pretty accurate. You know? Didn't try to have a conversation with them, see what's up, where's your mommy or something like that, We're about to go to break here, but my wife does something really funny now when she hits Spangers or anything like that. She says no thank you. So like they'll be all, hey, can you spare $1? And she's just all, oh no, thank you. And like goes in, and by the time they recover from the weirdness of whatever she just said to him, she's long gone and out of the
I decline
situation.
your offer to give you $1.
And her other thing is when people approach her in a parking lot, she straight up tells them, it makes me uncomfortable when people approach me in parking lots. And like you could get like the dirtiest, craziest, homeless dude. And if she says that to him, he's all, oh, I'm sorry, and like will slink away. You know, there's something about the word uncomfortable that makes people, you're making me uncomfortable, and it makes them just back right down, it seems. So use that with your black-eyed children.
Pro tips.
All right. Sounds like we're about to explode, and it is time for a commercial.
That's just the Illuminati shutting us down.
It is. You're listening to Radio Wasteland. Come on back for some more black-eyed children. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. It's Chauncey, it's Kara, and we're talking about black-eyed children. You know,
yes,
before we went to the break, we talked about the first big one.
Right.
The first. Had this guy ever heard of this happening to anybody before? Is this guy literally the inception of when this first hit the mainstream? Because you were saying people in the 80s like said, oh, that happened to me. But does that mean that they came out of the woodwork after the fact?
Well, I think that is what we're supposed to believe. That they never mentioned it until black-eyed children became like a thing.
Right.
But there's no indication that this guy ever heard of this happening to anyone else before it happened to him. What he says is he posted it on a message board, and pretty quickly he got tons and tons of emails of people saying, oh, I've seen these things. This happened to me. All that kind of thing.
It is one of those things that's hard for me to reconcile with paranormal, that there are dates when things start, especially when it comes to spiritual stuff.
Yes.
You know, why would, is that like when the Hellmouth was opened in Sunnyvale, or like what was going on there?
I think that might have been the first season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
Which is, in fact, the Hellmouth does open at the end of the season. So that could be why.
Don't act like I don't know these things.
That was the reference you were making?
That was the reference I was making.
I get it. Okay.
But, earlier we were talking a little bit about what we think that they might be. And, extraterrestrials never crossed my mind.
Yeah.
But that one actually makes sense that, they need to get a sweater, cover their weird heads.
Yeah, there's some similarity just to grays, right?
Help.
You know, they got the big black eyes and they're small.
Right.
So, there's some similarities to like Fae legends, which people think, maybe were inspired by grays. Ufologists tend to think that kind of thing, like abductions and all. That's what the Fae do. The Fae are supposed to be small like children, and they are sometimes described as having these pitch black eyes. So that's a possibility. I think it's difficult for me to say that that's what's going on, though, because of their weird thing where they ask for permission.
Right.
That to me seems like it has straight up roots in like demonic, sort of the occult, that kind of thing.
Right.
Because that's like a demon trademark. You're not supposed to interact with them, or they gain a foothold in your mind or whatever.
Sure.
So that's kind of what it sounds like to me. People have suggested vampires. I think that's a joking thing. Like, A, I don't think there are a lot of people who really believe in vampires, and B, the whole vampires need an invitation thing invented by Hollywood. There's a sort of similarity in folklore, but it's not. Yeah. It's not really. So I think we can discount that one. They're not vampires.
I don't know who said it or if it's from the Bible. I don't think it's from the Bible. I think got it from the movie The Devil's Advocate, but
sure.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing man that he didn't exist.
Oh, that's not from The Devil's Advocate. That's from The Usual Suspects.
Is that it?
Kevin Spacey says it about Kaiser Soze.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Don't clear that up, though. We don't want to spoil that one.
He's being interrogated by this detective about this dude named Kaiser Soze, who's like an urban legend.
Right.
But Kevin Spacey's terrified of him.
Right.
So, because everyone's terrified.
Where I'm going with this is I'm trying to reconcile the stuff starting at a certain point in history.
Sure.
And maybe on a demonic level, there is effectiveness in the belief and fear that goes with an urban legend.
Right.
That's
possible. Yeah. So you think maybe this urban legend started and now, demons are saying, ooh, that's a good template. Let's do it that way.
Yeah, one crazy demon did it one day. Guess what I did to this one dude?
And everyone's
then it
like,
worked, and the word started to get around.
That's amazing. I'm going to try that.
Right, yeah. It's like, because I think about that a lot. A lot of the time, people talk about, we have people talking about spirituality, other worlds. We had some great shows here recently with Tim Woolworth talking about other realities, possibly even communicating to the spirit world.
Right.
And one question that always comes up for me with that is culture. No matter who you are, every single animal has some kind of culture. Every single living thing has some weird culture, way of interacting. And I have a hard time with that with demons. It's like, do they go to the bar?
Yeah, do they have their little demon meetings?
Right.
Is it like good omens?
Are there demons that like make fun of other demons, and demons who feel bad about themselves because they're not demon enough? Is that me putting too much humanity on them? But it's like, if
I think occultists would tell you that yes, they absolutely do, and the astral plane is all about all these demons and spirits just interacting all the time.
Yeah, it's just a wild concept.
It's an interesting thing to think about.
But I really think if we're dealing with black-eyed children, that's what we're dealing with, is some sort of truly supernatural situation.
I agree.
A lot of the stuff we cover on here is fringe science or the possibility of aliens. None of that I really would consider supernatural.
But we talk about ghosts and stuff too.
Ghosts, when you deal with the idea of residual energies and stuff like that, is scientific, not supernatural. But in this case, I think we would truly. Well, it's grasping at something scientific.
Yeah, but then couldn't you just say, demons are energies from other dimensions or something? I mean,
you can, but it's a much further grasp.
I guess.
That salt is on the far side of the table. You're going to have to ask somebody to hand that to you. That's a reach.
I'm just going to put my chin in the soup and reach all the way across.
Right, yeah.
I don't care.
So I don't know.
So there is one account of a woman who let the black-eyed children in.
Oh, great.
And
great.
So it's a very long account. I'm not going to read it or anything, but
paraphrase.
The upshot is that what happened is she and her husband let these children in to use the phone because that's what they wanted. They called their parents. There was a lot of weird, like, flickering lights with the electronics. The kids were acting creepy and just saying over and over, "Our parents are coming."
That's terrifying.
They were getting nosebleeds and dizzy spells while they were there. The kids were seemingly like appearing, like moving around the house without being seen moving around the house. Horror movie stuff. Eventually, a car pulled up in front of the house. They didn't see who was in it. The kids got in, and that was the end of it. Except that the husband was diagnosed with melanoma, like, shortly thereafter. Apparently a type of melanoma that's like associated with over-tanning, which is something this guy's apparently never done in his life. The woman says they've both been getting these nosebleeds and dizzy spells since it happened, and that she is in the worst condition of her life. And the URL says, "I encountered the black-eyed children, and now I'm slowly dying." And that was sort of the implication, was that, like,
some serious clickbait right there.
Yeah. I mean, yes. So this is the only account we have of what happens when you let them in. But
were these the only people that we know that let them in?
Yes, the dumbest people in the world.
Well, I don't know. I think if you were...
I would let them in, to be honest. I wouldn't want to see what happens.
Yeah, I don't know. My wife would let him in. She'd be all like, "Oh, let me mom you." She's mom to the world, so.
Those are cool eyes.
Yeah, totally. Oh,
those contacts.
Yeah, my daughter has a pair of contacts just like those.
Exactly.
Because Terry, is the cosplay equivalent of a soccer mom, or at least was when our kids were younger.
That's awesome.
But so ultimately, I know I would like to believe this one. I would like this skeptical. One to be real. I want it to be real. It's freaking cool.
It's the coolness factor is part of what makes me skeptical, to be honest.
It's like it was made too much for me. It's like Slender Man. I can't do no Slender Man because it was obviously made for me.
It's very similar to Slender Man, although the people who made up Slender Man do not maintain it was real.
No, I know that. That's but a lot of other people do.
True.
A lot of other people do. So, sometimes, look at Whitley Strieber. Whitley Strieber was a science fiction writer who later wrote Communion and basically claimed that his science fiction writing was part of the trauma and repressed memories of his abduction.
And Communion has had a ridiculously massive impact on all things UFO, especially as it concerns abductions. So.
Plus, it's got Christopher Walken in it, and everybody likes that.
True.
Ain't no going wrong with Christopher Walken. All right, you're listening to Radio Wasteland. When we come back, I'm going to find out what a Skinwalker is. I've heard about him before. I saw a movie called Skinwalkers with Stephen King. I've heard Skinwalker Ranch, and when we come back, I'm going to find out exactly what that is. You're listening to Radio Wasteland. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland, and our guest, us, as we were talking about black-eyed children before, and now we're going to talk about skinwalkers. Now, this is something that comes up all the time. It seems to be, I'm just going to throw out my layman's understanding of it.
Sure.
It seems to be a bridge between supernatural and aliens. The Skinwalker Ranch, I'm not sure it's associated with UFO sightings, but I don't understand what that has to do with Native American spiritualism. It's a weird hodgepodge of stuff in my head. So,
kinda.
What is a Skinwalker?
So a Skinwalker is basically a werewolf, but it's... To break it down a little, it's a type of Native American shapeshifter. Specifically, it comes from Navajo culture. The idea is that some people who are trained as like healers and shamans get corrupted and do these horrible rituals to gain the shapeshifting power and basically use their powers for evil. In Navajo culture, you are not supposed to talk about skinwalkers. You're not supposed to think about skinwalkers, and they certainly don't like people who aren't Navajo talking about skinwalkers, so sorry. But it really kind of has entered the popular consciousness a little bit at this point.
Now, why is that? Is it a spiritual thing to them, or is it a fear-based thing? Or
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, the reason for outsiders is that basically they don't want people perverting and, more significantly, like profiting off of their myths, right?
Okay, that makes sense.
Also, skinwalkers are supposed to be able to read minds, and the idea is that, if you go around talking about them, they might take exception to that.
I see. And you might draw their attention.
Right, so they have a slew of terrifying powers, but like black-eyed children, there are a lot of accounts of skinwalkers online, many of which are not anonymous. When we had Linda Gottfried on talking about the Beast of Bray Road and Dogman, these came up. She said that she thought that maybe this, like when we asked, what do you think these Dogman sightings actually are, this is what she went to, is skinwalkers. Right. So here's a typical sighting.
Okay.
For some reason, these sightings always tend to happen on freeways. So these people are on a freeway. We crest the top of this hill, and down at the bottom of the hill, we see what appears to be a very large dog sitting back on its haunches in the middle of the road, facing the cliffs. My dad calls over the radio, "Hey, Trav, do you see that big-ass dog?" Travis starts yelling back over the radio, "That is not a dog. Speed up right now and hit it." He sounds almost hysterical. He just keeps screaming, "Hit it, you have to hit it, please, please hit it, right now." So my dad starts to speed up, and as we get a bit closer, I can begin to see it a little more clearly. It's covered in this brown, wiry, matted hair that appears to have dried blood all over it. It's still facing the cliffs, but the moment our headlights hit it, it turns and looks at it, and it has a face. I don't know how else to describe it other than a mix between a bear's and a human's face. It looks twisted and distorted and almost in pain. As we get closer to this thing, we start to realize it's actually huge. Though it was still sitting on its haunches, it is about shoulder height with the hood of the truck. We get literally inches from hitting it when it lets out the scream that sounds like someone screaming as their lungs were filling with water, and it leaps backwards towards the field, landing just on our side of the barbed wire fence. Then with another leap, it was gone from sight. More stuff happens. Pretty soon we are speeding like crazy, and just as we start to come near the outskirts of Gallup, we get pulled over. Travis pulls his truck over with us. Naturally, this makes the cop, a Navajo man himself, very on edge, and he immediately asks why Travis felt the need to pull over as well. Travis says, "We just saw a skinwalker a few miles back, and it's been following us." The officer immediately turns white, stammers something about a verbal warning, gets in his car, and takes off. We do the same.
Huh.
So that's a typical skinwalker sighting. They can take the forms of all kinds of animals, but generally, and there's pictures of them too, you know, sort of, I don't know how much stock to put in the pictures, but they're generally described as looking wolf-like, huge, and, you know, wrong in some way, sort of twisted or distorted, maybe with human-like features, just weird looking, not like a normal animal.
Right.
The first sighting in Skinwalker Ranch that gave it its name involved a giant wolf, like sort of wolf bear thing eating some of their cattle. They shot it several times with 2 different firearms, and it was not only not killed, but was apparently completely uninjured, and it ran away.
And this is why Skinwalker Ranch is called Skinwalker Ranch?
Yeah, so there were a few other sightings like that, but Skinwalker Ranch has tons of paranormal events of all kinds. But what gave it its name is these Skinwalker encounters, and it's right in the middle of Skinwalker territory. This is something that's very particular to the American Southwest. But
and I'm embarrassed to admit that, but is that where the Navajo are from?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. So the American Southwest. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a wild one. So what's the association with UFOs? Just other paranormal things going on?
Yeah, the association is not something...
Skinwalker Ranch?
Yeah, the association is not from the Navajo. The association is basically from Skinwalker Ranch. That's why people associate the two, is because Skinwalker ranches have like weird lights and stuff. Right. And it's, for like white people, the most well-known example of Skinwalker legends. You know, that's kind of in the popular consciousness.
Well, I can see why the Navajo don't want it used, because that initial freeway story that you told me is like terrifying. A great horror film.
Right. They're supposed to be able to keep pace with cars. They're supposed to be able to move 600 miles in a night.
Yeah.
You know.
And it would easily surpass the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me while driving, which is pretty terrifying. Me and my friend Jason were driving to Chico down the back roads from Redding, and it's pitch black. And Jason's driving like 60 miles an hour down these back roads. Which is
I know those
speed.
roads. Yeah. They're a little.
And all of a sudden, in the blackness in front of us, is a large square even blacker than the world around us.
That's weird.
And at the last minute, he swerves and misses what is a open dumpster facing us, where we would have driven into this dumpster at 60 miles an hour.
Not always
in the middle of a black road in the middle of nowhere. So Skinwalker would outdo that.
Yes.
For me.
Yeah, and they're supposed to chase you. They're supposed to not like people seeing them. There's some varying theories, you know. Are these the actual people shapeshifted? Are they, as Linda Godfrey seemed to believe, sort of the spirit of this person, like projected out and given some form of semi-physical form? Right. It's worth noting, though, there's a ton of correspondences between skinwalkers in the Navajo legend and werewolves from the European legends. They're not supposed to be able to be killed by bullets. The Beast of Gavudan, popular werewolf legend, a though some people think it was just a huge wolf, but in any case, it killed 113 people in France in the 18th century. It was shot several times. It was never hurt until it was finally shot with a silver bullet, which is the origin of that legend. Awesome. Skinwalkers aren't supposed to be able to be killed by anything other than a white ash bullet, a bullet dipped in white ash. So take that for what you will.
So I found that with indigenous, aboriginal folklore in general, that these situations tend to have purpose, or these spirits tend to have purpose. Is there a purpose associated with the skinwalker? Is it associated with...
Well, these aren't spirits. That's what makes them scary. They're people.
Oh, they're actual physical entities.
They aren't entities. They are human beings who have learned to take on this animal form.
Oh.
That's what's so freaky about them.
Right.
So, what's the purpose of a human being?
But the Navajo consider them to be bad guys.
Yes, they...
Not good guys.
Yes, being a skinwalker is the antithesis of everything that is, good in Navajo culture. You're not supposed to be a skinwalker. That's a very bad thing to be.
Bad to be a skinwalker. All right. All right. Well, have fun getting to sleep tonight. You've been listening to Radio Wasteland. A lot of black-eyed kids, a lot of skinwalkers, a lot of terrifying stuff.
Indeed.
And if you're at all like me, you have plenty of stuff to think about to tickle the imagination.
Put some Skinwalker ranch on that salad.
Yeah. God. All right. You've been listening to Radio Wasteland. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. Next week, coming up, we have Michael P. Masters talking about time-traveling UFOs from the future.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah. And, I think we've talked on here many a time before, and you've pointed out that if you can travel faster than the speed of light, you can time travel.
Yeah.
And so his theory is something down the lines that UFOs are not aliens, that they are humanity from the future, and he's coming at it from the angle of evolution, that why would they look like us? Why would they be shaped like us? And that, as humans have evolved from howler monkeys, our faces have gotten more narrow, our heads bigger, our eyes bigger, so on and so forth. And, it's not a bad argument because... I've always thought it was kind of weird that aliens were hominids.
Yeah, exactly. No, I can believe it, because also, why would they be interested in us? There are no resources that are unique to Earth, really.
Right. Unless life is so unique that we're actually interesting. Which...
Maybe.
I find it hard to believe that.
Right, I kind of doubt that. And every time we find evidence about, the prevalence of life in the universe, it's on the side of life is more common than we think.
Right.
So
I don't know.
Time travelers investigating their own past.
I wish I could do it.
Yeah, me too.
That would be one of I have a short list of power wishes, one of which would be able to go back in time and see, not necessarily interact.
Yeah.
But to be able to travel through time just to see is one of my powers.
I would like that. Yeah, I would. Man, I can't think of a time period I wouldn't want to visit.
Yeah.
I mean, assuming I could leave at any time.
Yeah, I can think of a lot I wouldn't want to stay there.
Yes.
But
yeah, the 16th century, great place to visit.
Right.
You don't want to live there.
If you could have any one superpower, what would it be?
Shape-shifting.
Shape-shifting?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I can shapeshift into someone with any other superpower.
Okay. So you'd be like Siler?
Well, he's like stealing superpowers by cutting people's
So you'd be like
skulls open and taking the brains.
The other dude who just absorbed them.
Nathan Pirelli. Yeah, I don't want to have to absorb it, though.
You just want to be able to do it.
Yeah. But mostly I just like shapeshifting.
In X-Men comics, Professor Xavier has a son named Legion.
Yes.
Who, Weller, and he has multiple personalities, and each personality has a different power. and can manifest new personalities that have new powers. And every power is what they refer to as Omega level, no matter what power it is that he imagines him having.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good deal to me. I want that, but without the split personalities. I just want to be able to, pull new powers out of my hat.
Okay. Now, without pulling comic book lawyer cheating,
okay,
what power would you pick?
Still shapeshifting.
Why?
For, transition reasons.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's your power that you'd pick?
Well, you can also use it for a lot of other things. I could use it to impersonate people.
Right.
I could use it to...
Be a cat.
Be a cat, yeah.
I would be a cat.
That would be fun.
I would be a cat.
Yeah, if I'm ever tired of paying rent, I could just find a household that's cat-friendly.
Yeah.
And just live there for a while.
Spray it, and it's yours now.
Oh, God.
That's the way these things work.
I mean... Okay, but, yeah, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah. All right, you're listening to Radio Wasteland. Come back next week and listen about time-traveling humans, and until then, do something else.